Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Man on the Rocks. We've been gone for a minute. I am the bald guy, Joe. Joining me, my co-host, the not so bald guy, Atlas.
Hello, everybody.
This week, we do a little bit of catching up. We talk about some of the things that have been happening, and then we dive into, we revisit the topic of mid-range hell and the mid-range singularity as it consumes all of us. Atlas, what do these people need to consume in terms of announcements?
Honestly, not much. I am thrilled to acknowledge that we have broken 100 subscribers
Let's
on
go!
the YouTube channel. So, yes, much thunderous applause. Really appreciate all of the listeners, all the people who've subscribed to our channels and been so supportive. Appreciate our play group and all of the people in our community, our direct local community as well, for really pushing us and supporting us to get this off the ground and get it started. That couldn't have done it without you folks. And then of course our lovely Patreons. We're gonna give a shout out to.
This week is going out to Max.
Thank you, Max, and of course all the other Patreons as well, because we wouldn't have been able to get this far without you. We don't have much to show for the donations yet, but we are working on a couple of things, not least of which is some exciting gameplay video that we're hoping to release sometime soon. So keep your eyes peeled for that. We'll be posting links to that in our Discord. And then I think that's really it. There are, of course, no more tournaments for the rest of the year. It's
off season time. It's off season.
Yeah, we're in off season. There's nothing for now. We're gonna pick back up with some stuff in January, I'm sure, but I don't know what that is yet. And personally, I'm really looking forward to taking a little bit of a break, get experiment with some new decks, play just for fun, and just enjoy jamming games over the holiday season. I would really hope that everyone else gets a chance to play Magic with friends and family and everyone that they care about over the holidays.
Absolutely. General ideas, we're going to try and get the gameplay video out before the end of the year. We're still working on some back-end stuff to really tweak stuff up and get stuff going and off the ground. However, in the meantime, 100 subscribers, as we mentioned, kind of a huge milestone. I want to do a Q&A episode. How can we the Qs? We're gonna use the old Discord. We got a little community channel going on. We got a submission channel. So please, if you have some burning questions, some interesting inquiries to provide for us, drop them there. Probably won't be next episode because we want to give some people some time to submit the questions they got. Probably episode after that, maybe 36, maybe 37, depending on what the input is. But please ask us questions. I would love to answer them. I would love to particularly answer these questions over a drink, which you should come on down and get with us. And we're back. Hi everybody. we're back. Unintentional Thanksgiving break happened. If you were in the Discord, you would have gotten these updates. Link in the doobly-doo. Yeah, we took a little bit of a break. Atlas, you had the Pacific Northwest Regional Championships.
Yep, yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, and then the week after was you needed recovery, and the holidays were happening, and we both basically just didn't speak to each other because we were so busy and tired.
Yeah, life gets away from you sometimes. Sometimes life finds a way, and sometimes life gets away.
Yeah. Which, hey, if you're still listening, you're still here. I appreciate it, even though we took a bit of a 2-week break. I know, the algorithmic gods aren't particularly kind to taking breaks, but I don't know. I think we have an audience that's pretty understanding of it so far. So I appreciate everyone for.
Well, that's the culture we want to build too. Is one of we're here to grind and play this game at a really high level and competitively, but we also want to make sure that people understand it is it is just a game.
Yeah.
And even if it is a full-time job for you, whatever you do, you still need to take time for yourself to keep yourself healthy, both in body and mind.
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure. I mean, one of the things that we talked about kind of early on was hey, this is yeah, we're doing this, and we want to do it well, but also this is like just like a hobby to us, like both the game and the podcast. So like, you know, if we're burnt and we don't want to, like, the moment we stop having fun is the moment like I want to stop doing this podcast, and I have no intention of stopping doing this podcast or anything like this because I'm having too much fun.
Thankfully, we're still having fun.
But yeah, so I haven't gotten a chance to talk to you. How was the regionals? I've heard kind of whispers about it.
It was really fun. It was a 2-day event. I think we hit like 64 players or like just shy, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
So it was truly one of the biggest events to be held in the PNW like ever. So right up there with like Marchesa and like some of those other events. But it was really awesome. We drew a huge crowd from all over the place, down to Oregon. We had people from Eastern Washington. We had people from all over. It was really competitive. There was a lot of like really high level play. There was also like some people, it was their first tournament, but like as we've talked about before, like some like you always have those, right?
That just happens,
and that just happens, and those people tend to get like weeded out in the first round or two. But it was definitely like the caliber was just different. And I talked to a bunch of like the people that we usually play with, and they were like, "Oh yeah, this tournament was really challenging for a variety of reasons." But I enjoyed myself. I played with a bunch of really good players, and had some really great experiences. And then there was a day 2. Where we were able to play the top 16 and the top 4 matches, and that was also really fun, just seeing everyone play those, like the same decks they were playing the day before, but 80 minutes Swiss rounds is very, very different than untimed direct eliminations. And so it's just
no
like
time, that's
super
insane.
Yeah, no time limit is just like, it's where it's at, in my opinion. Like, it just means that everyone gets to play at such a high level and make sure that there's like 0 misplays. Anything that like, sometimes you're not going to see the line, but like anything that you do wrong that's truly a bad play, like that's probably something that you just like got persuaded into doing, or like somebody else just outplayed you. And I really like that aspect of the game.
Yeah, the no time limit is huge. I mean, like it's so hard to try and cram a game of CDH into like an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half. Like, it's so hard.
Now 80 minutes, right? Because with this was an Eminence qualifier event for their nationals event next year, and the people who placed and did well scored points towards that event, that invite. But because of that, their time standards is 80 minutes, which was an event type that I had not played before, and honestly, that it felt terrible. I really dislike 80 minutes no turns. That's effectively the same as 75 minutes no turns, which like by extension is effectively the same as like 60 minutes no turns. Like it just keeps going down and down and down. And I've said it as a joke before, but like also there's a little bit of truth to it, that it's just big turbo trying to like make fast decks the only things that people play to these events, for a variety of reasons, but like a lot of it's just like for the sake of the TOs. And I think that like while we need to be grateful to TOs and judges and everyone for like giving their time, right? Like some of it also is like they're choosing to do this. They need to be ready to support like adequately competitive tournament environments, which I'm not sure that as we keep going lower and lower in time is something that is like really conducive to a truly competitive 4-player environment.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the format, because when I heard that it was going to be 80 minutes no turns, I'm like, that's the weirdest slice down the middle of everything you could possibly have. And like, yeah, I agree with you on like it's fair to the TOs, it's fair to, you know, the judges and all that stuff. And I think that should be done with some amount of consideration time, but also like I think a large part of tournament organizing and tournament structure is making sure that everyone is like is considering everyone. I once heard it explained that good tournament organization, I might have said this before, and like good tournament formats mean that you have to spend very, very little focusing on things like the timing round, turns, points, these kinds of things, where you can just focus on the game at hand and you don't have to worry about everything else around. And yeah, Yeah, no, 90 minutes and 80 minutes, like the difference of 10 minutes is not huge. Especially when you get like down to that part of like, oh, time is really, ticking. Like we're in the late game at this point. Like a single turn can take 10 minutes, and that's not like slow play.
Yeah,
All.
I think it's really just it's really something that needs to be thought about more because when you reach like you're saying, when you reach that end game stage, like even skilled players, like we have to recognize it's not a 1v1 format. Like in 1v1 Magic, and I don't remember if we've talked about this on the podcast before or not, but I know we've had the discussion, and so I'll reiterate it here in brief. But in 1v1 Magic, you've got 50 minutes on the clock for best 2 out of 3 games. That kind of makes sense. Everyone at a competitive level, everyone like understands how the game works. You're playing the best you can. You're playing efficiently. You might spend a little bit of time in the tank, just like making sure that like you're sussing out all the possibilities here. You might spend some time like in a grindy like game 2 out of 3 or something like that. And then you zip through game 3 as fast as you can because you're trying to beat the timer, right? And this doesn't even have anything to do with turns. We're not even going to get into that. But so you're playing against this clock that's effectively an hour for 2 players, which you can boil down to 30 minutes per player, which in theory, like that makes sense, right? It seems pretty reasonable.
Yep.
So it really baffles me that we keep boiling a 4-player format down further and further from what is 2 hours, which I think everyone can agree that 2 hours is too long, even if you're playing no turns. But you're boiling it down further and further from 90 minutes, which is the equivalent of 3 players, down to like 80 minutes, down to like, eventually I'm sure we're going to start seeing tournaments that are going to pop up and be like, oh, 60, 65 minutes, no turns. And it's going to be really, really silly because you're effectively having 4 players play 1v1 Magic when that's not the format that you're playing. You're
really
playing
isn't.
a multiplayer game. It's designed for 4 people. Everyone throws a fit when there are less than 4 people. Like, you can't expect 3 or 4 people to play the entire duration of a much more intricate game that requires aspects such as negotiating and like discussing threat assessment and making sure that people understand what is going on this way and properly communicating a 17 spell stack that's taking place on someone's end step right before the turn passes, whether that's at time or not. And you can't expect them to do all of that in 60 minutes, which is just a 2-player time period. And so I think it's silly.
Well, and like even breaking down that, like, okay, 30 minutes a player in 1v1, best of 3. Ideally, that's going to be about 10 minutes per player per game if we go to game 3. And that's just such a standard that is like basically impossible to hit in CDH, especially with these kind of time limits. Like I think 90 minutes no turns is probably like the least amount of time that I'd be willing to negotiate down for. That 80
was playable, but in my opinion, it didn't feel good.
Yeah, and that's the part I think that
rushed.
Sticks, right? Is again, I forget if we've mentioned this on the podcast or this was in the same conversation that we were both referencing. But like when you have a lower clock, you're very much incentivized to just hog all the time as much as possible. And what decks are really good at doing that? Adnau's breach decks, like the combo turbo piles.
Or look at all these game actions that I'm taking, even though they really don't matter. Or like I technically need to go through these steps, but like I can't shortcut them, or I don't want to shortcut them, or this, that, or the other.
And then okay, so the flip side of that is okay. Well, why does that matter? The reason why it matters is you can't have other forms of deck styles present. You can't have control present. You can't have mid-range present. You can't have tempo present. All of these things that kind of make Magic a really good game really good is you have all these different strategies that one can employ and they can be effective. But if the natural limitations of the tournament that you're a part of are starting to skew one way or another, well, I mean, we're competitive players. We're just gonna play the most optimal thing, right? Is that like too far?
No, that makes sense to me. That's kind of the way I see it. One of the ways that I've started to look at the timer is like I have not been the biggest fan of 90 minutes no turns in the past because I think turns are actually a really integral and like a very useful function to the game for a couple of reasons, and it's a carryover from 1v1, which is a given, and so compromises need to be made as we're playing a new format, right? I think the term that I've started to use is competitive integrity. I think that 75 minutes with turns and untimed rounds are the most those are the games that have the most competitive integrity. Mostly because 75 minutes you're playing on a shorter clock. People have to do things faster. But it means that just because there is a like huge stack just to stop somebody from winning, and that one stack takes up 20 minutes, doesn't mean that you, as the last player in turn order, get absolutely hosed by the timer. It
Absolutely.
means that as long as you understand how turns are going to work, you play smart, you play effectively, you're going to get at least one last shot to try and win the game, assuming nobody else wins.
Here is your window. Take it.
Exactly. And I've heard people complain about, nothing happens until turns, and everyone just waits until then to try anything. And that's sometimes true in certain games, sure. But I've also seen other games where people try and win like really, really fast, get stopped, and no one else can do anything until like that last little bit. Everyone's just trying to accumulate enough resources to get back into it. And or someone in fourth seat who, in theory, shouldn't have a chance to win, like during timer, and they don't because they're so busy stopping other people. You get to those turns, and everyone's like, yeah, turn 1, can't do anything. Turn 2, can't do anything. Turn 3, tries to do something. Everyone spends their last little interaction to stop someone from winning. And turn 4 goes, well, I'm going to demonstrate my win, and this is now my reward for going last. And playing smart and keeping myself alive this long, which I think is, honestly, that's a fine thing to do. It's just something that other players who are higher in that turn order have to wait. Is it worth it for me to try and go for a win here, or should I just bank up and stop the last person from winning? And that's like, it's all about decision making. And in a competitive environment, we're trying to incentivize and reward players for making correct decisions. So I think that's really, really good. But like I said, recognizing that compromises have to be made. For the sake of the sanity of TOs and judges and whatnot, I think 90 minutes, no turns. You get an extra 15 minutes. So in theory, as long as everyone's still playing on a reasonable pace, you can hit a similar length of game, because you can anticipate with 4 turns in a pool with 4 players, you can anticipate probably takes about 15 to 20 minutes to resolve turns if a game is going that long before it draws. And I think that it's a very fair standard to add that 15 minutes and then just knock off after that last turn, and that becomes your draw point. And that just means it's a little bit different way to play. No turns, it can incentivize a little bit of like scummy time hogging stuff. Not that it does, but it can. Once again, eating the timer is super toxic for a competitive game.
And I think there are angle shoots no matter like what method you want.
More or less what I've settled down to is like 90 minutes is still has competitive integrity. I just don't see it as having as much as 75 minutes with turns. But I think it's also a really fair compromise because, like I said, for the sanity of like TOs and judges and whatnot, you have to give them. They can't be there for 40 minutes while everyone tanks on this last turn, and then the tournament goes 2 hours over what the judge was expecting, because they have lives and they're humans too, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I was going to ask, like, okay, so like there has to be like some sort of give and some sort of take, so that would be like a fair compromise. Like we've talked about it before, but like, you know, those two formats, 75 minutes and with turns and 90 minutes without turns, like end up being the most fair. And when you think of the reason why turns exist in the first place, it's to guarantee an end of the game. Like, okay, I think I use the example of like Smash, for example, where like if like there's a timer or whatever and like you go into sudden death, the screen starts literally shrinking into a window, and the first person to make a mistake ends the game. Like, it's not fair, but the whole point of it is to put the end on the table. Like, this is it. Make your move now or forever hold your peace.
Bad decisions while rewarding good decisions.
Exactly. And like the whole position and turns thing, like I would argue that if you have a deck that is capable of delaying the turns to your last turn, that can be just as beneficial to being the first in turns. It's kind of like in poker a little bit, where like if you are the last to act the table, you are operating with the most amount of information. That is your reward for being the last person in turn order. And if you're the first person to act, well, sometimes you just have a better idea or a better game plan than other people.
Yeah, and so like obviously, like you said, always angle shoots. But anyways, all of this to say that
80 minutes no turn sucks.
Feels very bad.
Yeah.
Especially as a deck that plays slower. I hate getting punished by my opponent spending 15 minutes in the tank when I, the slow deck, is playing super efficiently. I'm resolving my game actions in a time efficient, respectful to the clock manner, and my opponent over here goes underworld breach and then like gets hosed and says, "Oh my god, I can still win," and spends another 10 minutes trying to do something when we all know they can't do anything, and then we run out of time on a clock. Like that feels terrible, and it happens all the time.
Yeah. Well, that's our funny little tangent about time. But apart from that, how was the rest of the tournament for you?
It was great. It was great. I had a fantastic time. I think there was one feels bad match in round 2 of Swiss where a player like totally threw the game, and they are one of the players who is new to the format, at least in the tournament aspect. So like obviously they're not a bad player. They won a game to make it to round 2, like in that particular pod, but they did just like they had an option to March of Swirling Mist something, and instead they cast Pact of Negation that they definitely couldn't pay for and knew they couldn't pay for. Which, like, we've talked about pacting things when you can't make
sometimes
it through
sometimes it's strategic.
Sometimes it's strategic, right? Like you can play for the draw by suicide pacting. There were 45 minutes left on the clock. That was not gonna happen. Yeah, it was like turn 4, and I had like 13 mana on the board, and they cast a suicide pact on something that, to be fair, would have ended the game. It was Seaborn Muse in the ring, and if we had not answered the Seaborn Muse, we would have lost upon the untap.
Yep, that's worthy of just tossing it out there.
Yeah, and no one would have been able to win, like, at all during that cycle. But it was just a very feels bad moment, which was unfortunate. It felt bad for the table. It felt really bad for the person who had their stuff packeted. It felt bad for Kinnan after the game. I was talking them through it. I was like, next time just phase the thing, because it's their end step and they won't see it until their next turn anyways. It's effectively the same as what we were trying to do, was remove the Seedborn Muse, and it gives us a chance to react. So next time just do that, and then you won't pack yourself out of the game. They're like, oh, okay. So it was a learning moment, but it did feel a little bad. But other than that, my other games were fantastic. A lot of really, really good players.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. Do you want to deliver the news that I've been trying to tease out of you this entire time?
That I won. Yes.
Yes.
I did.
Joe, put in some clapping. Yes. Congratulations are in order.
Thank you. I did manage to take the title after a hefty 4-hour top 4 match.
Jesus, the top 4 match was 4 hours long?
Yeah, and it was the competitive integrity of that game cannot be questioned.
I think I was able to tune in for like the last little bit, and I saw your board state, and I'm like, that is a Spellseeker, that is a Kitten. You have a lot of permanents on the board, a lot of lands, and you just put a non-creature on the stack. It's over.
Well, it was so funny because, to be honest with you, the entire game was run by Deafening Silence that landed on like turn 4.
Oh yeah.
And for most of that game, I was actually not most, but like a large part of it, like probably the first hour or so, I was running on 3 mana. I had 3 lands and a Deathrite Shaman that couldn't eat anything to make mana, so it was a rough start, that's for sure. I was really like feeling pretty depressed at the beginning of that match. Very, very like I did not have high hopes for the way that game was gonna go, and then. Turns out Stunt Double's a really good card. I top decked it a couple turns later. A Selvala got played, and I was able to end step that, so it had pseudo haste. So I was able to start tapping it
and start going.
Yep, just start going. We shut down a couple win attempts, and then Deathrite Shaman was the MVP of that game. Killed 3 players with that card.
We love our 1-mana Planeswalker.
We do love our 1-mana Planeswalker. All 3 of my opponents ate it to a Deathrite Shaman.
Excellent. No, congratulations, dude. That's massive. That's huge. I'm proud of you. You work your ass off for it.
Thank you.
Straight up.
That's
awesome.
It was just a pleasure to be able to play at the table with such good players. One of our other people from our local play group actually also fought his way up through a separate top 16 match. Give a shout out to our buddy Josh.
Yeah, buddy. That's our boy.
Yep, he fought his way up there and placed fourth. So that was super duper awesome. I'm very, very proud of him. He put up a hell of a show with his deck.
Hell to the yeah. No, that's awesome. I was checking the standings all day because I was stuck at work. But I was feverishly glued to it on my phone, and I kept refreshing every round. And like people around me, I was telling everybody at work, I'm like, yes, my boys are doing well. We got so many people in the top 16 and then the top 4 cut. I saw that. I told everybody, like, yo, half the top 4 is our boys. Let's go. Yeah. I was cheering you guys on from the sidelines as much as possible.
We definitely felt the energy, but I don't think it wasn't quite half. It was we had like about a quarter of the field. But,
yeah.
But also
I'll memory, but yeah.
I'll just take this moment to I shouted out Josh because he's our homie, but I wanted to also give a yell to Nicholas Hammond, also known as Joking 101, he's the original progenitor of Monarch. He was in that event, that top 4 pod. He threw up a fantastic game. Loved playing against him. He's such a stimulating pilot to have to fight. And then also Isaiah Monroe, who is piloting Blue Farm. Really, really just a pleasure to play against. He's from the Portland area. Fought him a couple of times. Very talented Magic player. So just a truly great game.
Hell yeah, we love to hear it. No, I love hearing that the top 4 wasn't like a whoops, someone just slipped in a Thoracle, womp womp, kind of game. Like it was a 4-hour, truly incredible game.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. No one was slipping a Thoracle in that first pod, or not that first pod, but in that last pod. I think me alone, I had like 3 pieces of counter magic in my keep, so it just wasn't gonna happen. Good. Okay, well, we did have a topic we were gonna get to at some point, but we had to get.
I needed to talk shop with Atlas and see what was going on. So you had brought up the idea of us wanting to revisit the concept of mid-range hell and the mid-range singularity. You have feelings about this. I want to hear said feelings about this.
Yeah, so I think we did that episode a couple, like, it wasn't very long.
Yeah, it was pretty recent.
But I guess at the time of airing, it's been a number of weeks.
So
we did that episode about how like everything's becoming mid-range. Everything is like it's tuning in towards value, right? And it sparked my attention, I guess. Maybe these conversations were happening before, but it caused doing that episode and then watching like conversations online and listening to people sparked my attention to pick up on these like bits and pieces where people are saying, oh yeah, the format is so mid-rangey. Let's obviously at this point, I don't see the ban list changing significantly anytime soon.
No, God, no.
It's in a pretty healthy space, all things considered. And this is not a ban list episode, but starting this conversation was one of the things that really just piqued my interest was people on the internet talking about, oh yeah, really wish Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora would get banned because it would push mid-range back so far. And it was just one of those things where it's like, I mean, I guess, but at the same time, I'm just not sure like that's really like all that healthy for the format. Because if you get rid of stacks pieces like Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study, you get rid of like a lot of like some of the best ways of combating these like super fast like turbo win decks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like sure, if you jam a win on turn 1 in first seat, someone probably doesn't have a Rhystic Study, but they might have a Mystic Remora if they win before you. But like resolving a Rhystic Study on like turn 3 or something like that means that the Storm player's probably not going to try for it into that. And if they are, the chances they get stopped are very high, and they'll probably lose the game.
Mm-hmm.
So
or they
players
have
won't
to find
try
a way
for it into that Rhystic Study. They will fall back on their own grind plan, which is maybe feed you 2 cards as I tutor for and cast my own Rhystic Study.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're stuck in this war of the Rhystic Studies, which has a game theory that goes along with it. If anyone's interested, you can look up Rhystic theory, Rhystic Study theory for Magic the Gathering. There's some videos and like articles and stuff on it. But it was that led into then I'm seeing all these people talk about other cards that have just become absolute staples of the format. that should be banned. Like Draneth Magistrate is a big one, and I think that the idea of banning Draneth Magistrate is such an awful idea at this point. When the card was first printed, I was befuddled that it wasn't banned immediately. It was in Ikoria, same set as Lutri, which got a day 0 ban. It was banned before the card was even pre-released. But Draneth Magistrate, which says you cannot cast your commander, the namesake of the format being commander, didn't receive that ban. And so that was just one of those things that just shook me to my core. But now, having played with it since, Draneth answers so many things that have become so relevant to the format. Underworld Breach cannot go off through a Draneth Magistrate. Players with hyper-efficient commanders that provide insane advantage or win the game access, such as Godo or Timna or Crom or Tivit or something like that, they do not get to access their commander through a Draneth Magistrate, which provides like a really weird dynamic where it also punishes like lower tier decks that rely on their commander to provide some sort of advantage over other decks, since their 99 might not be as good in 3 colors, but their commander might be really strong, right? And so it's just a really interesting conundrum, right? Where Draneth is good because it answers these really high level things, but it's bad because it also punishes these low level things, which is like the worst spot you can be in. But at the same point, like I at this point I am on that same boat of Draneth Magistrate is like should never be banned, just because it is such an effective way to answer so many just oppressive strategies that come from the command zone or the graveyard or cast from exile or something like that. And as power creep continues, we're just going to see more and more and more things like this. I think Soulless Jailer is a great example of a similar card.
Very similar card, yeah.
Honestly, probably should have been printed first, and then Draneth would be the power creep version that could later be banned. But at the same time, it's one of those things where I don't like. Obviously, Jailer doesn't see enough play that it should ever be considered for a ban. But Draneth like also just answers so many important things. I don't think it should be banned. And so it's just a lot of stuff like that. And so that is sort of the revisiting this whole idea of like mid-range hell. Like, should we be banning pieces for it?
Yeah, it's such an interesting thought experiment, because I see the reason for like wanting Mystic, like Ristic and Mystic, and pointing the finger at them and saying these are critical problem cards. But my response to that is play Nature's Claim and pay the 1, or trade the Mystic Remora for like a naturalize effect. The answers are there. Like you have the tools to fight them. You're just not allocating the room to fight those cards, or you're trimming them in favor of like just a pure like creature removal spell, or a more flexible bounce spell, which means that it has the potential of returning back, but you can tempo it out or whatever. And Mystic Remora and Ristic Study are so interesting insofar as they are just they're one of the more powerful things to be doing in the format. That is half of the reason why you want to be in blue, is to get access to those 2 cards specifically. At least that's my view on it. Like it's those 2 cards and its counterspells is like the reason to play blue. Would you say that is a fair assessment?
Oh, I think that's 100% correct. I think just not even Ristic and Mystic as much as just draw power in general.
Yeah, it's the best draw power in the game.
Those were the best draw power up until the ring got printed, and now everyone has access to the best draw power in the game.
We did it, ladies and gentlemen! Another week we mentioned that one ring in our hatred for it.
That's one for the ticker. I think we're at 4 episodes in a row now.
Oh yep. I haven't gone back to check, but all right,
that's it. Starting
every
today,
single episode, baby. We're
gonna start a counter on the Discord. And starting from this episode, this is mention number 4 weeks straight, and we will count up from here.
No, I agree though. In conversation about the ring aside, the ring does something, or Ristic and Mystic do something that the ring can't do, which is provide a stop to certain types of play and lines of players. Where like, it's really hard to like do a breach line or do a storm line through it, but if you have access to white, your out is essentially Grand Abolisher, and that puts kind of that whole dynamic in a weird spot, because you as a Ristic Study player know, okay, so I'll just pick a random deck, for example. The Mardu deck, the Gymna player, the Mad Farm player, for example. They are going to have a very hard time winning through this Rhystic study. They need to specifically find like Grand Abolisher, Silence, Ranger Captain-ish, before they even think about trying to win the game, so long as this card is on the battlefield. This card says you cannot do the Storm thing. Especially for decks like Mardu, for example, that have to be able to chain together a lot of spells, generally speaking. Sure, they have like, you have like Dualcaster Twin Flame, Dualcaster Saw in half, those kinds of things. But more often than not, those decks are trying to ritual those cards out. Very rarely are they making land drop 6 and trying to do that. They can do that, but that's not like the ethos behind the deck.
Spell chains are really what the colors do.
Yeah, it's really trying to do that, and those cards are really, really good at stopping exactly that line of play. Same idea with Drannith Magistrate. I flip-flop between Drannith is fine, I hate Drannith, Drannith is fine, I hate Drannith. Currently, I'm on Drannith is fine. I will probably flip back at some point, at least temporarily. It's one of those things where it feels almost like a necessary evil at this point. Like, if we are allowing cards like Najeela, Tivit, Timna, Crom, like these incredibly powerful cards that we are just giving and into our starting hands to cast, there needs to be some way of fighting that. And it's not a hard thing to fight. It dies to a Lightning Bolt. It dies to a Doomblade. It dies to most good forms of spot removal.
Tivit doesn't, but different story.
Yeah, different story. But I'm fine with those types of safety knobs, existing in the format. Like, no one's complaining about Rest in Peace. Half the decks in our side of the format want their graveyard at some point, or use their graveyard as a resource. No one's complaining about that being like ban worthy. And I view it very much the same way.
Card to play.
Yeah.
You can find a deck that could. Woo!
Yeah, no, like, granted, Rest in Peace is a little bit different. It's not asymmetrical. But like that idea of like, oh, this incredibly powerful hate piece, or I'm talking about Drannith Magistrate, this incredibly powerful hate piece, I don't think it should exit the format. I think that will ultimately do far more damage than it being in the game is causing for those decks right now. At this point, it's a part of deck building. What do I do when Drannith Magistrate hits the battlefield? Does my deck fold to Drannith Magistrate hard? How many outs to Drannith Magistrate am I running? Are my outs flexible enough to hit other things that matter besides Drannith Magistrate? It is just a part of the format. And at this point, I don't think I want to see it leave. Because I think I fear the world without Drannith Magistrate, then I hate the world with it in. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's a part of the meta like any other card game meta that's ever existed in the time. There is a thing that is oppressive, quote unquote. You have to account for this and play with that in mind and understand that that's a part of the game. You can hate that part of the game, and that's totally fine. But it does so much in terms of kind of safeguarding the format. It's a knob on the safety wheels that we have, and we like the safety wheels here. Rhystic and Mystic, though, I think take that to like an nth level degree because it stops players and also puts you very far ahead. Granted, you can pay through these things, and Mystic Remora is only non-creatures, but we're casting a lot of really good non-creatures here, folks.
It is, those two are a little bit different in terms of like they're directly advantaging you if people aren't playing correctly.
Well, even then, like
sometimes they can't play correctly, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you get stuck on one land, and you have to cast this like Mana Crypt or this Soul Ring or whatever, and you can't afford to pay because it's turn 5 and you need to get back in the game, which is unfortunate. But that also then like players a lot of times take that as their excuse. Oh, you didn't pay for it? I'm not paying for it. And that's where the things really
that's
start
where
to,
it gets
like,
that's where
the wheels come off the bus.
Yeah,
because like just because one person didn't pay for it doesn't mean you don't get to not, like, unless you're okay with just losing the game. And it's just something that players have to account for. I also wanted to go back to your point about like play the Nature's Claim, right? Like to some extent, like like the Gymna, the Mardu out is Grand Abolisher. Well, I mean, yes, they also have removal spells that can hit these spells.
Absolutely. March
So,
of
like,
Swirling Mist, or March of the White March.
Yeah, the White March. Or like Red Blast or something, right? So there are other outs. Like it is possible to like remove these things, right? And so, but then once again, that like sends us further into this like this cycle of mid-range where it's like, all right, something lands that I can't beat, so I don't want to try and win because I'll lose. So I gotta set myself up to accumulate enough value that I can beat it. But then like once I start doing that, like the games go longer, and when the games go longer and there's not a lot of time on my clock, like it gets a lot big turbo, man.
Big turbo.
It gets a lot harder to like achieve decisive results that have competitive integrity. Unless someone is just going, all right, well, you only have 1 mana, or like you're tapped out because you just cast Rhystic Study. All right, let's balls to the wallet because I don't think this is going to work out, but fuck it might. And then eventually the person hits a force of will before the Mardu player is able to,
or the endurance, or
yeah,
like
or whatever
whatever
it is. They hit their free cast
Boseiju
spell, assuming they're tapped out, or somebody else has something to stop them. But you've already fed the Rhystic Study 5 cards, and so now you pass. The other person's like, well, shit, that person already has 5 cards. They're winning on their turn. I guess I better try. And now they try, and they get stopped, and now it's +10 to that Rhystic Study. And it's like people just need to learn how to play like responsibly, and like it sounds like such a nag, but also like being good at the game. I can say this
playing responsibly.
Oh yeah, you can scoreboard literally anybody. You can say whatever the hell you want.
No, I can't. But like, but for real, like to some degree, being good at the game is like impulse control, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's understanding like, oh shit, I really want to try and do this thing right now, but I understand that if I do this right now, I will lose. Or maybe not right now, but like I will take this game action, this thing will occur, and I don't lose to that thing that occurring, right? But I lose like 2 turns from now because that thing occurred.
I've set things in motion that cause my own demise.
Exactly. So like, what is a really good example of this? I will sample the top 4 game that I just had from regionals, right? And this had nothing to do with a skill diff at all. It was literally bad RNG because Thrasios sometimes just hex you. So there was a Thrasios Vile list that was being piloted by Nick, and he just accidentally flipped Hullbreaker Horror, which is the card he'd been digging for all game but couldn't tutor for because there were 2 opposition agents that were in rotation. And he accidentally flips Hullbreaker Horror with a Thrasios activation at end step or whatever. There's a Deafening Silence in play, and he's at 2 life, and I have a Deathright Shaman, so I activate Deathright Shaman to kill him. He flashes out the Hullbreaker Horror because his out is to win over the top of this activation, otherwise he dies. I have a Mindbreak Trap that he can counterspell because that's his 1 non-creature spell. But someone else, Isaiah, has a counterspell to eat that counterspell with and defend the Mindbreak Trap.
Jesus
and because
Christ.
of that, he loses, right? Like it's not like, and we talked about it after the game too. It's like not one of those things that was like gonna turn out any other way. As soon as he flipped that Hullbreaker Horror, he lost the game.
Yep.
And there was nothing he could realistically like do about it, right? Because we all know if that card hits the field, we lose the game. So we have to kill him first. But also like he knows that if he casts the Hullbreaker Horror, he dies. And so it's just one of those like really unfortunate like positioning things based on turn order and like some other card sequences and stuff, right? But it was as soon as that Hullbreaker Horror flipped, he lost the game. And that can happen with a multitude of other conditions that have nothing to do with being as cut and dry, and frequently they do come down to skill diff, where like a player makes a bad game decision, such as not paying for a Rhystic Study or casting a spell into a Rhystic Study that they plan on like paying for, like they cast a Grand Abolisher into a Rhystic Study, but we know they've tutored for Breach. Doesn't matter if you pay for Rhystic Study or not at that point, because we're all not paying for any of our spells, because we're going to use all of our resources and save all of our mana to counter your Grand Abolisher so we can interact with your Breach so that you get hosed by this Rhystic Study. But in doing so, we're feeding all of the cards to the Rhystic Study. So a better option for you
Tale
is
as old
to
as
just
time.
huh.
A tale as old as time.
Yeah, right. So we're gonna feed the study so they get an answer. So also like maybe don't cast the Grand Abolisher until the Risky Study leaves play, which means you have to grind more, which means the rounds are gonna go longer, and on and on and on and on and on. And I think that truly, like we talked about mid-range hell being all these value cards and like grind.
That's where the value hell starts.
Yeah, but I think and it does, but I think this cycle right here is like, if you want to play well, if you want to win, if you want to play correctly and not leave everything up to RNG, you need more time if you're playing these grindier decks, because you have to play around cards like Ristic Study, like Mystic Remora. And if you're doing that, then you have to make sure that you have ways to beat them, which are in the deck, but you have to find those, which sometimes you can tutor for, but sometimes you need to grind extra cards to get to the tutor, so that you can get to that card, so that you can remove that, and then you need to have protection for your removal, and blah, 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 blah. And of course, like, now we've played an entire game of Magic, but that is what mid-range hell is, right? And people are using the term control winter, but I think to some degree, it's just like the format evolving, right? Like people are just
it's just the next step.
Yeah, they're just like, we have people who have at this point spent long enough playing the game and developing theories around playing the game and how these different strategies work, that not even control winter, it's just that like these pieces that are good for control and good for grinding are getting printed, which of course makes turbo players a little sad and salty, but because their strategies aren't getting support, because if Wizard prints really good turbo pieces now,
the control decks just play them.
Well, not even that.
Sometimes.
It's like if they print a really good turbo piece, like it has to be in a set that's specifically not standard or pioneer legal or modern legal or anything like that, because otherwise they're gonna wreck their already tanked 60 card formats. Even worse. And they don't want to do that if they don't have to. Like, not that they care that much, but there's some consideration.
Sales. No.
Yeah, there's some consideration there though, even if it's small. And so like cards like Rograk are obviously never going to be printed into a modern legal set, because there would be so many things that go wrong. Which means that we have to wait till commander sets to get things like that. But in the meanwhile, all of these 60 card sets that like obviously have commander support, but like they're printing cards that are still good for like a 1v1 format, where in theory if you're trading 1-for-1 on these things, it's relatively fair, even though it's a strong card. But like it's way better in my control list than it is in your turbo list, where every single card has to say win the game or get to a card that wins me the game. And so it's just one of those rough spots where like everything is snowballing into control just on like sheer card quantity at this point. There are so many options, and that with theory development means that players are playing more responsibly in general, as well as the fact that like if a player doesn't play responsibly, they get punished a lot harder for it by these control lists.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot.
Just like thinking, but
yeah. Well, is mid-range does it have to be the end-all be-all then at that point? Because it feels almost like fight it or join it, like a little bit, at least the way that card design's been going, right?
Yeah, so the way that card design's been going, they keep pushing more and more efficient like stacks-esque pieces, whether they're asymmetrical or not, and that those cards, especially if they're asymmetrical, those cards slot really, really well into mid-range shells, which then blurs our very simple matrix that we're all accustomed to of like, all right, stacks beats turbo beats mid-range beats stacks, right? That's our very simple, easy diagram. But when all of a sudden all the stacks pieces are so efficient and like so slanted towards advantage towards one side that all the mid-range decks are playing them, like stacks and mid-range have suddenly become this one singular blob. Yep. Which is just labeled control now. And so it's control and turbo, but turbo beats control, but also like turbo loses to control. So it's like you have this very like strange dichotomy where turbo can beat it, but turbo has to go so fast that it's very unreasonable to expect that style of consistency from the list, especially when you have to mulligan down to like 3 to see a playable hand every time.
You have to mulligan down to 3. Your seat position matters. Like if turn 1, seat 1 goes Mystic or more, and you're playing like essentially like mono red Sly, like you're not beating that.
Yeah, or like you kept a hand that loses to a mental misstep, and there are 3 other players playing mental misstep.
Mhm.
Like you're like, well, I guess I send it and really hope nobody has that card.
Yeah. Well, it's like if you look at like balls to the wall, fast as hell, mono red aggro versus like slow like blue white control. Like it's almost like a similar like mentality. Like in theory, mono red aggro should beat it every time, but sometimes blue white just has the pieces to stop the early pressure and turn the corner. And you just get there at that point because your deck is just set up to do that. Like it's the same. I at least see the same dynamic when I see that personally.
Yeah,
when like you see the like turbo versus like control like idea. Like it's just control versus aggro to me.
Yeah, and it's a really good comparison. I think the only difference there is that there
are 3 other players to consider.
Yeah, there are 2 other players here, right? So like, and even if they're not playing control, if they're playing any form of interaction, like obviously they don't want to lose just as bad as the control player doesn't want to lose to you. You playing the aggro turbo deck, whatever. So they're still going to spend their resources to stop you, even if they're also fast aggro decks.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go turn 1 Thoracle Consult and Brogside sitting to your left hasn't hit a land drop and mulled to 4, but one of their cards is misstep, they're misstepping your consult every time.
Every single time. Without a thought. Do you have at least 3 life? You're casting the misstep.
Yeah, it's every single time. And that's what makes it really hard, I think, is that you're not only fighting, because I think if it were 1v1, or like you were just had to worry about beating a control deck, like at worst you'd mull to like 4, and you'd wait for them to resolve their advantage in like a risk study or something like that. And then that's when you'd go for it. Like risk study on the stack, you'd go ad nauseum. Or like they tapped out for study, now I'm gonna cast an Underworld Breach. You just go for it until I can hit my protection piece, and like now it's at worst for me a 50-50.
Yep.
But it's not just that. There are so many other things to consider because it's multiplayer, and that's what makes it such a rough world for Turbo right now, I think. Is that it's probably like 75-25 in favor of control decks versus turbo decks right now. At no statistics to back that up. That's a very crude like ballpark from the way that I see the meta right now. But yeah, I
can't imagine playing turbo right now. I just can't.
Well, I mean, our friend John does it. Like that's all he plays, right? And he just gets hosed time after time. So like, kudos to him for the mental fortitude, because I know I'd be so upset. But it's one of those things where like eventually the meta will shift. Something will change, whether that's Wizards fucks up and prints a like super nuts card for turbo that like control decks aren't playing because it doesn't do anything for them, which is going to push turbo like back towards the forefront, or they're going to stop printing these crazy asymmetrical stacks pieces, advantage pieces, blah, and they're going to start increasing the cost on them so they're not so aggressively costed. They're going to start balancing things more, for lack of a better phrase.
Something will change.
Something will change eventually, and the meta will shift. Though, like, it could take a while, and that's why we've been calling it the mid-range singularity for years, is because everything's heading there eventually, right? Everything is at some point going to hit this like, oh, look at this, Splinter Twin is 15% of the meta type deal, even though Scam is like 35. But
whatever, we're not talking about that. Hey, buy the cheap pack, by the way.
The idea is like everything's gonna hit this point where that is the only deck that's viable, is some variety of like mid-range or control or something. And I think there'll be a gradients within that, whether they're faster mid-range or slower mid-range, but it'll basically just create like a new flow chart where it's like, you're playing a deck that tries to win by turn 5, you're playing turbo. And then, you're playing a deck that doesn't win until turn 12, you're playing stacks. Something that demonstrates a win on turns like 8 and 9, that's mid-range. And it's just gonna everyone's changing perceptions at that point.
You don't understand, I'm playing mid-range.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe there will still be certain like decks that that do try and skew to the super hyper fast end of things, like Rogsai or something. But they'll need more as things get more and more mid-range grindy. Those decks will need either much greater innovation, or they will need new pieces to actually come out that can be like played with to advance the strategies of those decks.
Yeah, I don't want every deck to be blue farm is the thing. I think Sam mentioned it when we brought him on, and that thought has just been sitting with me. I'm like, yeah, I think that's ultimately where I rest. I don't want every deck to be here's 15 value engines. You're gonna need to slow the game down to get these value engines out and resolve those. I like the mixed bag. I like the grab bag of it all, and like it's so hard to pull yourself away from those cards. Like, hey, Resident Mono not blue player here. It's really fucking rough to not play Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora. Like, holy shit, those cards are they just win you the game on their own, and you have to cope so hard to get even close to that. Oh my god, you have to cope so hard. Which is funny because I feel like my deck in particular and like just my playstyle in general, I'm pretty good about like respecting the Rhystic and, you know, not feeding the fish when I can afford to not feed the fish. But I think that's ultimately more of a player thing, and like the deck helps out a little bit rather than, oh, this is the deck doing 90% of the work and me as a player doing like 10%. I can go on and on about that. Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora just go so unchecked. I guess the One Ring can be lumped into this category now, where they're just allowed to live. And you introduce politics into it, where it's like, oh no, you don't want to kill this because this stops the Storm player, and sometimes that's true. Other times you just go, yeah, I have things to stop the Storm player too. I don't need you to be drawing cards, and then get into the whole kerfuffle of it all. But like, I as weird as it sounds to say, Bowmasters just isn't the answer to Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora. They still draw the card. They still do the thing. Like, sure, you get to pressure them, and that matters sometimes, but like that doesn't fix the issue. Like, drawing cards is powerful, and when we have a format where we're doing a lot of powerful things, card draw being like basically the only untapped thing that's like not really being like punished is or not being punished well enough, if you ask me, it's a little interesting to kind of just like view that from
that a Hull Breacher convert that I hear?
I've said I've been on the Hull Breacher. I don't think I'm all right with Hull Breacher specifically because it does the Rhystic Study. It's Rhystic Study for Rhystic Study. You're converting resources and advantage. I have reached the nirvana of card games, as I'm now going to call it, where the best thing you can be doing in any given card game is something that stops your opponent and also benefits you. Like, that's just like at a basic level. If you can be doing this consistently, you will win the game eventually. Hull Breacher is just the same thing stopping the same thing. It doesn't fully put a stop to it. Like, sure, you don't get the card draws, you still get untapped treasures. Like,
no. That card's fine. It should be unbanned. We want to see it. Everyone would love to play against Hull Breacher.
I'm fine with Hull Breacher being unbanned if the treasures came in untapped. If there was some sort of safety valve on the card, or like, hell, like even just give me like a 3-mana flash creature that says your opponents can't draw more than one card a turn, or like they can't draw outside their natural draw. Like, just put that on a 3/2 creature.
It's a 3/1 actually. It's called Spirit of the Labyrinth, but
but okay. Differences are you can pitch Hull Breacher to Force of Will. It's a 3/2, and it's in blue. I think I mentioned that again, but I said it differently because they mean different things.
No. I think it's fine. I'm sure no one has a problem with this card. I think it's actually such a silly ban.
You know what? You might be right on that one.
But for real, like, I agree with you about punishing card draw, and I think like it's interesting because I've been seeing like the 4-mana Sheoldred pop up in more lists.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it?
Reason. Because while 1 damage might not be enough to stop
2 damage matters a lot.
2 damage tends to be enough to stop Rhystic Study, and Sheoldred does deal 2 damage per card, and it's also pain in the ass to kill and a really good swinger.
Yeah, it's like a 4/4, right? It's like a 4/4.
It's a 4/5.
It's a 4/5. Okay, good.
With
so it's got the best
Death
stat line in the
Touch or
game.
Menace, something like that.
Oh, I'm pulling this card
it's
up.
Got a keyword.
Yeah, I know it has a keyword on there. Okay, yeah, it's a 4-mana 4/5 with Death Touch on the body, and then whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. Jesus Christ, this card's $80.
Yeah, because it's played in every format except for Commander, and just you wait.
It's gonna start being played soon.
It'll soon be played in Commander. It'll soon be, if not a staple, it will be a default consideration for any deck playing black. Just because it does answer Ristic Study.
Yeah, no,
and the format is slow enough that you can do 4 mana for that.
You can Dark Ritual this out on turn 2. It's double black pips, which is
easy.
like it's an easy casting cost to achieve. I mean, like, if we're tapping out for 1 ring, you can tap out for a Shieldred.
Yeah,
and like
Black
the
Source,
same
Black
impact.
Source Mana Crypt.
Yeah, no, like it's a totally reasonable, totally affordable game plan that has impact. Like on first go, like you play this, you drain that whole entire table for 6. Like that is impact. That clears the smell test, as far as I'm concerned, for CEH. Like it does something on impact, and it stops people. So it has upside there. Yeah, no, I do like this card a lot. I think it's very cool. But like it does the Bowmaster's thing of like you still draw the card, you still gain the resource. Like life is a resource, but like life is not a card, is what it comes down to. Yeah, the mid-range Singularity is we're definitely in the throes of it. Definitely in the throes of it. And you factor in a lot of the other stuff, like, oh, you gotta be in colors, you gotta do this, that, and the other. And it's really hard to not see everything pulled towards, like, a slice of blue farm, in a way, where it's like, oh, this is blue farm, but creatures, or this is blue farm, but I don't know, you do something slightly different, I guess, but, like, you're still doing, like, the blue farm game plan of, like, I'm playing an efficient win con, I have value in the command zone, and it just run the best interaction, the best in-deck card draw engines, and together they will form Voltron, and I will kill you.
Yeah, that is more or less the Blue Farm game plan.
And it has splintered out to everywhere, which I guess makes sense when you have... I'm not saying this is the cause of it, this is just where my train of thought is leading me. Where like people go, oh yeah, blue farm's the best deck. Well, it's like, well, okay, how do we you do the information dissemination game, where you see the best thing that people are claiming to be the best thing, and you go, okay, how does this deck make it tick, and where can we use this theory, this idea in other decks, and can we crack other things? Can we take the lessons that we learned in this deck that has proven itself very, very handily? How can we replicate that game plan in other ways? And the mid-range Singularity spins and spins and spins and spins. And short of printing different cards, because that's like the only thing I can think of that doesn't break the current meta in its current standing, I don't see mid-range is here to stay, far as I'm concerned, which is I'm mixed about it. I'm very mixed about it, because I like mid-range. I think the most interesting games of Magic happen in kind of the mid-range space, where neither player is fully dominating another player, and the game is happening. There's interaction. There's back and forth. People are taking shots and receiving shots. And I think mid-range allows for that. And I think it allows for a very big deal of skill expression. But at the same time, like, man, if every deck's doing that, then like the person in me that goes variety is the spice of life just goes, man, I need something else here.
Yeah. No, I get that. I think that those games are the most intriguing, and I think that like the Singularity it'll
break at some point. It always does.
I was gonna say, like, it might break at some point, but it will, if it keeps up the way that it's going, it will tend to, I think, dull the appeal of the competitive scene for like viewers and new players and stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is like really unfortunate, because there's a lot that we can be doing in this game. It's just a matter of like making sure that there's enough support for all sides of the equation, because like you said, we don't want one thing to be completely dominating another. You want to be in that space where you see, oh wow, this really cool deck just made like a top 16 or a top 4 or whatever, and it's not just the standard I'm gonna Thassa's Oracle or Underworld Breach you.
Yeah, like we're speaking in general terms here. Like,
I do think we have moved past the point where, like, Thoracle kills every single table. Like, it happens a percentage of the time. It's a known thing, but much like Drannith Magistrate, where we talked about earlier, where you have to, like, it is a part of the format. You should expect it. You should respect it. Simple as that.
Yeah.
You know, expect it, respect it, and, like, understand that it's gonna happen, so you need some sort of game plan. You need some sort of way to fight against it. I recently retooled Chainer, and I have to put Baleful Mastery in there. That's why now it's a Thoracle. You gonna try a Thoracle? I'm gonna kill you. Get out of here.
Get out of here.
Get out of here. And like it has flex, like it checks all the marks. Like it is in here kind of to stop this one specific thing, but it also is flexible. It does a lot of the things. It passes kind of the removal test, as it were. But like I don't think Thoracle needs to leave. I'm fine with Thoracle being a part of the game. Like, it just means that there's just going to be another Thoracle type beat in the room. That's all it does, is when you decide, oh, we want to get rid of, or the conversation becomes, oh, we should get rid of, you know, the best thing to be doing in the format. Well, there's always going to be a best thing to do in the format. Like, you keep doing that, we're going to be playing, I don't know, just like basic lands and like 1/1s, I guess. Like at a certain point, like
True
you just
vanilla magic.
Yeah, like at a certain point, you'll just end up boiling down to nothing, and it's just like, well, this isn't really what you want. It's fine. Like it's so telegraphed, it's so known at this point that like, it's whatever. And I mean, hell, the game we taught, your finals game, Thoracle wasn't a consideration whatsoever. Everyone at that table understood Thoracle's possibility and realized it's not going to happen early. It might happen at some point if the table swings that way, but like everyone is expecting and respecting it, so it's not going to happen. And with the flexibility of all the cards we get to play, it's very easy to just incidentally put those like things in there that just stop it. Same thing with Breach, same thing with everything else that's good in this format, and everything else that's good at stopping those good things in the format. This is what we call deck building. This is what we call consideration.
Yep. Wow, we've really given a comprehensive lecture on this subject.
We absolutely have. We here at Man on the Rocks really value our ability to talk about mid-range for like an hour straight. 2 hours now if we count the previous time we talked about it.
Yeah, it's so true.
All right, well, lecture is over. I expect chapters 7 and 8 to be read by the time we meet next session. You'll find your homework assignments on, I don't know, what's an academic website people use these days. I've been out of school for too long.
Ooh, ratemyprofessor.com.
Yeah, be sure to rate us on rateyourprofessor.com. I hold my entire pride and personality on that website, so it means a lot to me personally. I don't care about the job.
Joe gets the chili.
Get the chili. That's right. All right. Atlas, closing remarks for the class.
None at all. Thank you all so much for being with us so far, and I think we'll catch you next time.